So good morning. This is Liz Baxter, the CEO for the North Sound ACH, and appreciate you all jumping on to do kind of a next dive into how we're thinking about transitioning from the agreements that we have with you all here in 2021 to what we hope is setting us up for some different kinds of relationships in 2022. And I'm really grateful. There are a lot of folks from our team that are on the call, and the team from Community Initiatives, and Monty's going to kind of help me facilitate through the first part of this. And then as we get to the second part of the discussion, Nicole Willis and Alicia Benish will help as we start talking about things like how we're approaching cohorts and contracts and scopes of work and change plans and all of those other things that you all are familiar with that we've done in the past. So I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. And we have this land acknowledgement that we adopted probably 4-ish years ago. And even this, I think we are ready to do a next iteration of, but it has been something that has grounded us in the knowledge that, we sit on land that traditionally has belonged to the tribes of this Coast Salish people. So we begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. And as we often do, we have a link that always sits at the bottom of this land acknowledgement that takes you to a website that was actually originally put together by some folks at the University of British Columbia, where you can put in your zip code, not only where you live, where you went to high school, where you got, your first accident, your first tooth came through, whatever you would like to do, so that you can actually see across the nation and really across, multiple nations, the traditional homelands of Indigenous people, wherever it is that you lived now or in the past. So thanks, Megan. If you could go to the next slide. So we introduced on August 12th this notion that we were going to build a collaborative action network. And we shared with you all the first draft of a set of beliefs, common agreements that we were hoping partners would connect to, as well as the notion that this commitment would be the start of building something that kind of wrapped around what we've known as the Medicaid Transformation Project, and actually could take on a life of its own and continue on into the future. And so there were some things about that we're just going to kind of describe where we've been and what we're hoping to head to. And there is a link to the current draft, and if someone could put that link in the chat box as well, that would be really great. Just so that you have the current version of that draft compact. It has changed a bit from what you all saw on August 12th. And so there was in the Medicaid Transformation Project kind of this emphasis on healthcare improvement. It was focused on kind of disease evidence-based models, looking at health system metrics, and how we could actually get hospitals, public health, other clinical partners to be working to advance some system improvements, specifically around the Medicaid population. And over the last couple of years, and you've seen this evolution in our partner learning sessions, we've really been moving to having an emphasis on equitable well-being, on getting to a place where all people in all places across the region can thrive, so that we can see who's struggling and suffering and actually move very intentionally to a place where all can thrive. If you go to the next slide. And then, you also have seen that we're kind of changing how we think about partnership. And so we have been asking leaders, individuals, and organizations to become engaged. That's part of the kind of exciting part of this draft compact, is that it's not just about those who traditionally have power kind of driving the work, but that individual leaders and banks and grocers and other businesses could also potentially see themselves in this space where they are working together with you all to create a space where folks can feel like they belong, and where we can actually bring our collective assets together to help people in the region thrive. So the shift that we're making, we have this set of contracted providers who, in the end of 2018, signed contracts with us, completed change plans. We have been doing contract monitoring since then. And that has included an incredibly diverse group of organizations, from 5 hospitals, 5 health departments, tribal settings, community-based organizations who've all been working on these Medicaid transformation project focused areas. And what we're shifting to is that individuals and organizations, whether they have contracts with the ACH or not, can actually come together if they're all committed to those kind of aims and beliefs that we've laid out in that draft compact language. And go to the next slide. And so we put that draft together. That draft actually didn't just come out of thin air. We had so much material that has come from you all as you've done your semi-annual reporting, as you've met with the project managers. Our board was engaged in pulling that together, and we had a work group that had been meeting for probably about the last 7 or 8 months to put that draft together. And so we're trying to move from, you have a 3-year contract and there are these very specific things that you will be incentivized to do over that period of time, to actually having the network determining its own priorities and what it is that you all bring to the table, and perhaps coming up with ideas that we have not come up with yet, that the state has not come up with yet, but you've got collective energy and passion and potentially assets that you could take action together. And the ACH can be a bit of a backdrop and a backbone support for some of those activities. Go to the next slide. And so this is, and if you have the draft compact pulled up, this is really just a re-envisioning of that theory of change. Like, what are the areas that we see ourselves focusing on that are going to drive kind of our capacity to support the members of the network who want to be working on things. And so some of this is work that we see ourselves, the ACH, involved with, but it's also work that you all could do. So, we see ourselves, for example, having a role in convening and providing staffing support for data collection and measurement, and how we might create resources that you all can use. But there's nothing that precludes you all from playing those same roles if it is about an area that you happen to have an expertise in, or you've got just so much more knowledge. Rather than us being the broker of your knowledge, you also could potentially play any of these roles. If it's something as specific as, I think of those of you that did the one key question training, and there's not a reason why there isn't somebody within that group who could step up and actually lead whatever the future work might be around reproductive health. And just trying to continue to elevate the energy and the passion and the assets that you all are bringing to the work. Sometimes we will be stepping in, and sometimes we may not need to do that because you already have the resources and the leadership to make that happen. So we're going to go to the next slide, and I'm just going to apologize in advance. There's been so many variations of this that, I'm going to say probably 10 people have tried to help visualize this, and I think we're still at about a C+. But it is trying to visualize what does it mean to become part of this network, and do you have to say yes to everything about everything? And so there's kind of two elements of this. One is that the network itself and that set of commitments, that anyone who's willing and has the same beliefs can become part of the network itself. And then in addition, we may have folks who say, so my organization actually wants to be engaged in this work. So I've done the commitment around the beliefs, and now I actually want to be doing some of the work. I want to commit my organization. And then the last piece, so these are kind of nested in a way within each other. The last piece is that your organization is actually wanting to actually lead some work. And so you can participate in work, you can actually lead the work, and each of those builds upon the prior layer. So you're still committed to what's laid out in that draft compact. Your organization might be really interested in continuing the learning and the partnership. Your organization might decide that you actually want to lead some of that work. And there would be different levels of commitment, both from how much you do, as well as you might say, I actually want to lead the work in this area, but I only want to be a participant in these other two areas. This is where I've got kind of the breadth and the depth to step further into a commitment around this work. And then underneath all of that, we have a bit of a fourth layer, which is that we are talking about bringing together partners who want to invest in this network, who have financial and potentially other resources to bear, where they can step in, they want to be engaged. But let's just say, if I pick somebody, it's People's Bank. And, People's Bank doesn't do healthcare, they don't do community-based care, but they obviously support several organizations across the region who are doing this work. And so we want to bring in other partners who have the same level of commitment, the same desire to see the change in the region that we're talking about, and see that would allow that work that's happening across partners across the region to continue to feel like there's some revenue that can help support the work that's going on. So we're going to be working on kind of a network investment process along the way. And Meg, if you could go to the next slide, thank you. And so now, and we know that from August 12th and the questions that you all sent over the last 4 weeks, heaven help me, it feels like it's only been 2 weeks since August 12th, but it's been almost a month. That there are folks who asked us, how can we actually make a commitment until we know what the work is that might be happening? And so the team, really Alicia and Nicole, have been doing this work around what some possible cohorts might look like, what that focus might be. And we're really close to having kind of a draft change plan or scope of work ready for you to look at. But it's going to be different than the one that you currently have on file here, because it's not going to be focused around what the Medicaid program is asking us to focus on. It's going to be focused on the things that you all have told us consistently that you would like to see us put greater emphasis on, and where, I think of some of the questions that Nika has put in, your reporting, like what are the things that you felt you were going to sustain regardless of the end of the Medicaid transformation project. And so just know that the things that you're seeing on this slide are just examples. They are not the totality of what we have in that list of possible cohorts, but you can see a mix of, there are things around care coordination and behavioral health integration that are just so incredibly important to continue forward. But we've also been introduced to the vital conditions for well-being. And so, are we looking at housing? Are we looking at food? Are we looking at some of those other pieces that impact health? We've obviously gotten pulled into a lot, and you have as well, on the impacts of COVID and looking at COVID recovery. So you can see here, like, these are some of the elements that we actually see organizing partners and our work around some of those things. But I could have probably done 2 or 3 slides to highlight what those possible cohorts look like. But the cohorts are going to be driven by your interest and your commitment. So we're not trying to create a cohort and then kind of out of the work that you all have told us is really important to continue. And so you'll see that as you get the information about what the change plan elements might look like. So if you go to the next slide. And so this biggest change, which I just couldn't find a picture good enough to represent, because I tried to think about like this, the spoke and wheel, or direction that goes. But it's really that we want to change the relationship so that we don't end up here at the ACH, as rich as this has made our team, with 75 organizations who are in partnership and relationship with us. We actually want to take that and create a scenario where you all are in partnership and relationship with each other. We feel like that is the strength of what has occurred over the last 5 years, and that anything that we can do to help make that happen, you actually have space and support to work with each other, and that there's room for other organizations and other businesses and entities to join in this work. Then we feel like we've actually taken the step from being within the confines of the Medicaid Transformation Project to pulling something together that it can actually carry on regardless of the Medicaid Transformation Project and its dollars and its direction. When we had the very first documents that we had to prepare back in 2017, asked us to state what our sustainability model was for the North Sound region. And what we ended up putting in writing was that our sustainability model was built on relationship building. That when the 5-year waiver was done, that if partners had actually entered into relationships with each other and were continuing work in year 6, that was going to be the success. That was going end, but that there would be work kind of moving forward. So we feel like the introduction of building the collaborative action network is a step in that direction to help continue to foster those types of relationships. So here's where we are, and we're going to ask you all to spend about 10 minutes in some small groups, and Monty may help kind of tee up the small group discussion. But in August, if any of you want to go back and listen to that longer session, we do have that recorded and we can get the link to you. We've had 3 revisions of that draft. We had input in the chat box and in emails on August 12th. We've had several of you and others who have reached out. Our board members have reached out to give advice. And so the document that you have the link to is actually gone through 3 revisions. And we feel like it's gotten stronger with each revision. So, but it is still marked as a draft. So you've still got about 1 more week to give comments on this draft. And then the next things that we're hoping that you're going to see, the change plan by the end of this month. Tiffany on our team has been reaching out to organizations to set up one-on-one meetings so that those will occur between mid-October and early December, so that each organization, we're not asking you to make decisions as a group, but that each organization will have a chance to look at this and see where it fits, both within the draft compact and in the potential areas of work. And then in 2022, we begin to transition to kind of this next future state. And so, for a while, we just would really like you to reflect on some of this. Sorry to have both dogs deciding there's something exciting going on right now. And then when we come back, just Nicole and Alicia will be available to talk about more questions if you've got questions about possible cohorts and what that might look like as we're moving forward. So thanks for listening to that first part. And Monty, would you mind helping us just jump off into the small groups?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Liz and team, thanks for putting that out there. I was kind of struck just as you were reading through this that this network, to this point has really honored this idea of co-creation, which in being iterative, and I think it would be easy for Liz, you and team to want to put out and answer all the questions right away. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that this is an iterative process and there's some clarity around direction that have been formed from a lot of different places, and there's still some unknown. So again, kudos to just this network being able to hold this kind of, hey, here's some clarity, here's some ambiguity. We are creating this together. We're going to model it. We're not paying lip service to that. So I guess in the small groups, I think we're going to be in groups of 5 or 6. Encourage you all, if you can, to come off and show your video if that's a capability you have right now. And yeah, I think as Liz suggested, as we're getting more clarity and more feedback, what's compelling? Is this directionally correct? Does it feel like we're on the right track? The type of network that would be compelling for you to be involved in, and what is that's making that compelling for you? Are there other questions and ideas? And I think this is up to you all, whatever you come up with, but just kind of recognizing that there's going to be some more tactical, some things in the change plan that are still evolving. So it'd be great for you to kind of address the bigger picture a little bit and see what else is bubbling up for you that we can kind of just turn to. And I think Nicole's going to talk a little bit more about the cohorts, and Alicia, if you have some that, yeah, I'd like to put that out there as a potential area of interest I don't see on that list, that's fine. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So what's compelling? What other questions or ideas are coming up for you? And we'll check back with you in about 10 minutes. So thanks, Megan, for putting this in. All right. So nice to see lots of faces here. So I know Nicole and Alicia perhaps are going to talk a little bit more about the cohorts and some next steps, but figured let's take a few minutes just to kind of hear what was bubbling up for you. And again, it would be great if folks would come in and voice any ideas, what was compelling, other ideas that were bubbling up, and certainly feel free to also use the chat. So who would be kind enough and bold enough to get us started?
I'm always known for one being bold enough. I'll go. Hi, Monty. It's Shannon from Unity Care Northwest. And I was with Tammy from the YMCA and also a number of folks from NSAC. I think, so Tammy and I did most of the talking since we were the only two kind of partners on the call, but Tiffany added some context too. I think for Tammy, what I would say for Tammy and I, and Tammy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what's compelling is we're really excited about seeing the future state for the first time, really showing specific, things that we're working towards. Like, it was really exciting to see as a board member too on the, ACH, is to really see all those conversations about future state and kind of like seeing where that's going. So I think that was really compelling, and we both felt it was really the right directions. And we all felt like we both felt as partners that would be easy for us to get our organizations behind. So that was compelling. I think what's a little bit, causing a bit of anxiety is just that it's still pretty vague. And so, I said, I'm an operations person, right? And so I'm used to where's the rubber hit the road? And there's nothing that's very specific yet, right? So that kind of what is the ask going to be? What is that going to look like? And yet that's also like Tiffany said, the beauty of it too, is that allowing some flexibility in the partners to determine, what is going to be the biggest impact that they can make in those areas, and not having so much really specific, allowing innovation to kind of take hold. So that was our conversation. Tammy, did I get that right?
That was great. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah. That's awesome, Shannon. Lots of places to kind of grab onto for other folks around kind of specific, but still sufficiently vague, creating some anxiety and some excitement. What else bubbled up for folks in small groups?
Monty, I'll share. I'm Yuki. I'm with Ideal Option, and I had the benefit of being with all ACH staff, so I did all the talking. So we talked about the space that, or the role that the ACH can have is really creating the space for partners to brainstorm and come together for those aims. But it's really the group that decides and determines what those individual projects can be. And I had an example of how this is happening right now with the Access to Care group that I'm in, of actually just this whole process and how Ideal Option is playing into that, as well as the other ACH partners. So we got to just talk about an example of how that really does look. And then I was just sharing that I'm super excited about the action piece of this and the ability to really execute, as opposed to come together and do a lot of talking and strategy, but not, just implementing things, trying things, changing things, and bringing projects forward. So that's the piece that I'm most excited about.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Yuki. Kind of double clicking on where Liz was landing. This really implies a very different shift in the relationship and who's driving the energy and the action and what that means. I'm curious, did you have a quick, succinct way of offering kind of what that looked like?
Sure. Yeah, so for this our Access to Care group, we were trying to find a quick win. And Ideal Option is part of the HCA's Hub and Spoke. And so we had a free spoke. And after listening and being in the space of the ACH partners and hearing this need, I went to the program manager just to ask, hey, could we do something a little different with this spoke and create an initiative for ACH and our group to use the funds for this particular thing? And they said, yes, we're totally behind it. And so we're funding it. I'm leading it. And then the group is participating and helping to bring things forward. And I have the support of the ACH through Megan to really kind of, I did most of the writing, but she's been helping to communicate and to coordinate some of the pieces internally. So that's just a practical way of seeing this kind of in action.
Thanks for that, Yuki. Yeah, it's a really beautiful illustration of what a really distributed network could look like, on a bunch of different fronts. Thank you. What else came out of the small groups? Compelling questions, ideas.
Hey, Marco, if you're still on, would you mind sharing your thoughts about the what you shared about individuals being able to join this?
Sure. Thanks, Liz. Hopefully my dog doesn't bark in the background. But one of the things I wanted to share, and there he is, was, hey, quiet. One of the things I wanted to share was about how we define leadership is often, we don't really think of individuals in the community as people that have things that have assets or things like, or can contribute to conversations. We often think of leadership as people that are already involved. And so I think this whole idea of including community members who are assets to the communities because they're, they live there, is just another way of thinking about community engagement, both in terms of the folks that we involve. Just because I think, often we think of leadership as organizations that are already out there working, and for a lot of communities that are not often, at the center of conversations, they're performing leaderships in other ways that we might think of traditionally what leadership looks like, right? And so if we think about leadership in different ways that are not the traditional model, we realize that there's folks out there that are already performing a lot of these tasks, and often the folks that are already part of the conversation, I'm gonna include myself. We don't realize that there are other folks that might have something to add that we just might be aware of just because they're not included. So I think this whole idea of including those that are marginalized sometimes by institutions themselves, I think creates an opportunity to be more inclusive to the work that we do, to best serve those communities that we want to serve, because we're including those folks in the conversations.
Great. Thanks, Marco. I appreciated hearing it the first and the second time. Thanks.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Marco. Thank you. Again, so nicely captures some of the spirit in which I have heard around why going to individuals and really centering on community, and particularly marginalized voices that are so critical to understanding the solutions and how we move forward. Other thoughts, ideas that you'd like to put out there in the next couple minutes before we transition?
Hi, good morning, Monty. This is Jackie with Communities of Color Coalition. I just wanted to share, I'm particularly, as far as the question, compelled that one, ACH is really falling in line with their model of teaching targeted universalism. And the framework I see is, when Liz mentioned talking about creating space to allow us as partners to build that rapport, to build the relationship, to strengthen the efforts across our region, is really speaks to a collective impact, right? So moving as a collective, and leveraging and getting back to being communal. And so for me, I'm excited that it is definitely in line with what we're saying we're centering and what's important to us when we talk about creating a space where everybody has a sense of belonging and everybody gets to go. So just to, what Marco was saying about, individuals not being recognized, we often get attached to titles, credentials, not realizing it's the very people like we're excluding. And so we perpetuate harmful behaviors and patterns, and we're moving away from that. I just wanted to share. That's what's coming up for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.
I just wanted to add some really interesting questions that came up in my breakout group, where Melissa, Candace, and Katie were already kind of brainstorming around the cohorts, thinking about what are some community partnerships that a group focused on a particular area may want to tap into collectively. And also, I think there was interest in thinking about, these subjects like behavioral health integration or housing. These are things that our partners have been working on for years, which is why we've listed them as potential cohorts. And so thinking about, what if there's competing priorities or work that's already being done? How would a cohort address that? And we were kind of getting into ideas around how a cohort isn't meant to, have to recreate the work that's already been done, but thinking about where is there momentum that collectively we could build on, or collectively look at if there's already leadership in a particular area, where are there some gaps that group might want to prioritize. So we were just having some really interesting conversations around, I think what next year will look like and how folks sign up for cohorts around particular areas will have kind of some flexibility to determine what specifically they are working on together, and where they can kind of know that if work is already happening, they might just be supporting versus taking that on and leading it outside of, again, the work that's being done.
That's really helpful, Alicia. Thank you. Yeah, if I think of another kind of like from and to, that in the contracts that you all have that are expiring at the end of this year, they were segmented by project. If you were working on chronic disease or care coordination, behavioral health integration, opioids, dental, like they were segmented in a way that if you were an organization that might cross all of those things, and Shannon, I think of some of our early conversations, 3-4 years ago, like, does this mean you're committing to 8 things? or, you know, like, are those all separate, or how, you know, how your organization can best lean in? The prescriptive nature of the toolkit sometimes made it harder because you felt like you were separating things that are more intertwined. And, you know, I think part of what we're looking forward to is seeing how you might elevate one cohort over another cohort based on where your organization is really wanting to lean in on something. And so trying to, I mean, obviously when it gets to signing things and committing to things on paper, you need the detail. But it's how can we not make the final decisions on those details without you also having a chance to tell us where's the space? Where's the space that you and your team are either already leaning in or already leading, or with some support, you feel like this is a space that you would actually move to. It's a different way of thinking about how we actually capitalize on this amazing wealth of assets that, you know, we feel like we've gotten introduced to across the region. And, you know, maybe it does just go back to that notion of co-creation, of how we can do that when, you know, I think all of us are used to, here's a list and you check these 3 things off the list and then you get paid for those 3 things off the list and you report on those 3 things on the list. You know, I think we really are talking about something that might include that, but is more than that.
Liz, that reminds me. So because we were fortunate, just Yuki to talk to in our breakout, some of what you're speaking really, I think, aligns with what our group had talked through. And some of the questions that we were talking about was, you know, like, what does this really look like practically? And so, you know, that co-design concept is showing through with the cohort concept. And then also, what are the roles then of the different partners? So Yuki being in a position that can take on, because it aligns with another project that's funded that she's working on, or what then is the role for the ACH staff to support some of this? So I think for you know, if I reflect back on where we were with the first change plan, which was required to be a bit more scripted under the way we were operating with the Medicaid waiver project, this has transitioned, you know, and I think the other thing that I hope folks are seeing is that we have been pulling a lot of like the cohort ideas, that theory of change, really looking at these are awesome skill sets to do innovation, co-design projects. And then the cohorts are a chance to test out that theory of change. We've been using reporting to inform like where the cohorts are going. And then as Monty mentioned in the beginning, like we don't expect it's not an exhausted list. There could be groups that start earlier than others, but you know, we're really looking to you all to help shape this. And it, you know, so far the feedback we've been getting is we're getting pretty close to being on target, but just so appreciate like that you all are seeing yourselves in that. So that's kind of what our group of Yuki and the ACH staff brought up.
You know, and if I could use an example that's surfaced in the last, I'm going to say 3 months, but don't hold me to it because my daytime orientation is totally off. But, you know, we have the 5 counties, the 5 health departments, the hospitals, public health, and we did not have a project in the Medicaid Transformation Project that was focused on workforce. But as you all can imagine, the last 19, 20 months, workforce, which was already a challenge, is like uber a challenge now. And something surfaced in Island County where the ACH helped convene the county, the state, the Department of Health. You know, the teams have been pulling together long-term care facilities, and because there was a need that got surfaced by a partner that needed to occur. And I think the other place that I just see some opportunity. Rather than us prescribing what we're going to do for the next 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, these cohorts might surface something compelling that needs to be addressed, needs support. And so how do we create space for, again, those leaders across the region, individuals and organizations, to tell us, this is what we need to find support to work in, and we've got, 70% of it or 80% of it, and maybe you'll have 100% of it, I don't know. But like, there just hasn't been space before for partners to elevate an area of concern and need and to tell us, and we've got 7 partners who are willing to work on this. I mean, I think that's kind of the flipping of the lid that I see occurring, is that you all can drive some of that direction. And, our job then is to go out and try and find the support to help make that happen. That's really different than us saying, we have $10, will you do $9 worth of work because we're going to keep $1, and telling you what the work is. I think we want to see like just some collaborative and collegial way of learning from what you know, because there's so much that you know that we don't know. There's things we know that we can share, but it just feels like so much of it is what you know out in community and on the ground. And that does make it ambiguous. And I wish I could think of another word to describe it. Maybe I'm going to change ambiguous to it's fertile ground. Like there's a lot that we can do to, I'm going to go in my gardening mode, to till the ground, to amend the soil, but you all get to plant whatever it is that's going to grow. And I just think that that's what I'm hoping is the nature of the work and how we can build it looking forward.
So Liz, listening to you, a question that comes up then is, what's the filter, and how do we all decide what does go forward? And I'm going to say funded, because that's a lot of times what the ACH is going to provide is, what's the criteria to be supported?
Yeah, and Yuki, it's a great question. We've actually had one area, and I might use them as an example for 2 reasons. Amanda on our team has been staffing an oral health local impact network. And when we were first deciding which projects we were going to do in the Medicaid Transformation Project, what do you call that when it becomes like a repeating theme? Kind of the repeating theme that was occurring around the state is that the ACHs would probably do 6 of the projects, but we wouldn't probably select reproductive and maternal child health and oral health because they didn't earn us enough money. If we met the metrics, those things didn't earn us enough money. And so we became the only region that chose to move forward in all 8 of the project areas. And so we're doing oral health and reproductive and maternal child health. What that gained for us was a partnership with the Arcora Foundation, formerly the Delta Dental Foundation. And they said, can you staff organizing a group of partners who actually make that criteria and make those selection decisions themselves and make decisions about how money gets shared across partners? And so that foundation added money to our pot to pay for part of a staff person and to fund innovations that were occurring among oral health providers across the region. And we didn't set the criteria. The steering committee that came together around that focus area set the criteria. They actually made the decisions. They recommended things. And the ACH was the convener, the facilitator, the tracker of records and decisions. And when they would tell us, we want to send money to communities and schools in Whatcom and Skagit, we would process the check. And it could be that there are some areas where we need to play more of a role in setting criteria. But I think that oral health local impact network has given us some learnings of how cohorts might actually make recommendations and decisions and set criteria themselves. And, you know, I think that's going to be really fascinating, and it just may vary from cohort to cohort. So I'd like to think we can pull from you what should the criteria be. We can help operationalize it, but I actually think that you all know most of what needs to happen and how things should be set. And I will add, just because I know that the whole money piece, you know, still sits out there, even if you haven't asked it yet. There's two things that the ACH did back in 2018. First was that the board just, you know, and there's so much I love about this board. And in my career, I haven't always said that about boards that I report to, but this is an awesome board. And they made a decision that 10% of every dollar the ACH earned would be put in what we're calling a community resilience fund. And so we actually have a fund that has been growing over the Medicaid Transformation Project years that we want to leverage to actually invest in these upstream important issues that you see in the compact. And so we have some funds, and the Healthcare Authority is now at a point where they see support of the ACH and the ACH infrastructure as a longer term journey beyond the Medicaid Transformation Project. So we anticipate continuing to have funds to share with partners. It's really how we do that and what do we support that we're looking for partners to help us with some of those decisions. Does that help, Yuki?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Nicole, do you mind if I ask you to just talk about kind of next steps around the cohort discussion and change plan and all that jazz?
Sure. Yeah. As we're still kind of working on it, but yes, I'll do the best I can. I have Nika and I have been working, Nika Osteen, who's kind of our lead on our reporting. We've been working together on, and those of you who like the operations side, like I know Shannon and I do, that really trying to outline, take the change plan, because that was a pretty clear way of looking at what the work is, and starting to create something similar, having some similar, the work might be a little different, but we are trying to take what worked well within the change plan and the contract last time and use it for this time. So our hope is that we have, I don't have a timeline yet, Liz, but preferably before Liz meets with you, you will have a copy of change plan and the contract, just so you can start to see what it looks like. When we first did, it was 3 years ago, so it was a smaller group, smaller team, but when Heather and Ross and I were doing change plan, like open office hours, I imagine that we will be following a similar process, collecting your questions and then sharing it out. Because if you have a question, there's a good chance that another partner has a similar question. So as we collect that information, just kind of making it very transparent and open to you all, I imagine us following a very similar process. So Liz, I can't remember when your first meeting is, but I think it's October, November.
I think on the slide that I shared earlier, you're going to have the change plan by the end of September.
Well, perfect. It is very, I will say, I mean, we're super close. It is very close. And the fact that, we had this kind of nice aha moment that the theory of change is really the work that we would like. It's an awesome skill set, but it's also an opportunity within the cohort. And that's what the work is, to test those out, that theory of change. So that kind of has fast tracked the change plan. But I I think we're almost there. So Liz will make that deadline and we'll be able to share it out. Probably we'll just share it. It kind of one of our either the newsletter or an email blast to y'all, along with the compact again, if we've have any changes based on feedback that we've been receiving. So stay tuned. 2 weeks. Here we go.
Probably the last thing that I would want to mention. So we do have a list of possible cohorts, and again, Nicole and Mike, I don't know if you remember if it's like 16 long. It's got kind of a starting list, and I think what our ideal is that that's probably what will show up. But it's not exhaustive and exclusive. So it could be that in 2022, June and November, another cohort emerges. And so just trying to actually create space where we start with agreements about what is known, but we want to leave space that as new partners come in to the network, new work might emerge as well. And so how can we create those kinds of agreements that don't result in, oh, now I need to redo my contract? And so we have been somewhat trying to not tie the collective action network inside of a contract box. And I'm not sure we totally have the answer on that yet, but we're just not trying to have your contracts be something that are so cumbersome that if the work changes, you're necessarily thinking like that means I have to change this contract. So that's the piece that we're working on over the next month. And when we do those one-on-one meetings, you'll hear about that. And I always come back to the notion the Medicaid Transformation Project had 5 objectives. They're in the special terms and conditions. They're in the contract between CMS and the Healthcare Authority. They're in our contract. And one of those 5 objectives was to advance equity and reduce disparities. And there in 5 years was not one thing the ACHs were held accountable to in terms of that 5th objective. We chose to do this focus on the tribal and equity learning, to emphasize some things in the change plan that weren't required elsewhere. And I think this compact is coming out of what we've learned about that commitment to equity, and we'd like to be the region that says we're gonna make this real. The board has had the conversations, our team has had the conversations, partners have had the conversations. We think there's something incredibly compelling around organizing ourselves around equitable well-being, but just know that we're not doing this because we're required to do it. We're doing it because you all have told us this is an organizing piece that you'd like to learn about, continue to lean into, find ways to try things, to sometimes fail in front of each other. And, we're not expecting everyone to be stellar stars. We just want to be getting better every day because this is important work. I'm kind of curious if there's anyone on the call, partner-wise, who has a reason why their organization might not be able or ready to sign the compact. Because I'd like to, I think in August we were asked a question: is signing the compact a condition of being a contracted partner? And it has forced us to say, so what's a reasonable amount of time an organization would need in order to agree to these commitments. And if it's like longer than between now and December 31st, what does that mean? Does it mean like the door is closed? Does it mean that we try and help folks get to a point where they can make these commitments? Just any thoughts that you might have on that.
Liz, I can share something I heard in my breakout group. I met with Island County Human Services, and they shared just the real impacts, continued impacts of COVID, and stretching their staff really thin makes it hard to think about prioritizing these bigger structural issues while the day-to-day is so overwhelming. But as that conversation developed, it was also, Teresa said, we can't say we're going to wait till focus on equity till COVID is over. Like, those things need to happen simultaneously. So it was kind of this both and of the system stuff is important. We're really strapped day to day, but there's also a desire to see the systems work move forward and play some role in helping to do that.
Thanks, Amanda.
Liz, I would say the same thing, for us is that I think when I read through all of it, there's not one thing I have concern like about from a philosophical or a, directionally or anything like that. But I will say we are taxed, right? We've put off almost all of our goals and objectives for 18 months to do nothing but COVID. And we're just trying to get back to some of those some of those things were really high priorities. And so while I don't think we have a problem conceptually with any of those things, what that means, again, when the rubber hits the road is what I think we'll have to evaluate, right, as we go through that process. I think we'd like to be part of it. I think to what extent and what that means, well, I think we'll have a lot more clarity as we get the change plan and as we have the one-on-ones with actual NSAC staff and can chat through that will probably make me feel a lot better.
Thanks, Shannon. And just so that, I think on August 12th, we had 5 organizations that were on that call who were ready to sign the first draft. So we're not starting at 0. We're at a minimum starting at 5. And, again, this is an adventure and potentially, a learning experience for us as well as to how we launch into a network that's actually built on the things that we've said we believe. And, I think somewhere in the next day or so, Meg Stevenson on our team is going to share the poem that Candace read on August 11th because she gave us permission to do that. And, there are just like days when I just think of her words of don't just talk about doing something, but do something. And so, it's going to be interesting for us. But, I think, Shannon, to your point, like if an organization, if a partner says to us, we can only sign on to the commitments and we can't do anything in the change plan. Like we just can't take on a task in 2022. I think that's going to be helpful information for us to know, so then how do we shape the network? What are some of the supportive things we can do around that? And that's what we're going to learn here in the fourth quarter. So, Nicole, do you have anything else you want to share before we hang up? And Monty, any closing thoughts you might have?
No, I think maybe the only thing is just keep an eye out for some more drafts to look at, and then also, as usual, reach out to, use the team at North Sound ACH email if you've got questions or comments. We're still, this is an evolving, fluid document, just like kind of the last change plan was. So any input helps a lot. And yeah, that's all I would share.
Mm-hmm. I just maybe to state a couple obvious, it sounds like, this is really affirmation of this co-created process that continues being on the right path, which I think is great. And this team's ability to really hold that space of ambiguity as you move to fertile ground. And I think our CI team has really observed what is it that is going to be airtight enough, not perfectly airtight, so that you can kind of put this into the river. You all talked a lot about the emergent and creating that, what's that first vehicle, the first canoe, the set of canoes, the fleet of canoes that would allow you in 2022. And it feels like after the couple things that need to happen over the rest of this fall, you all will be in a position to kind of start to test this out and evolve it over time. So it seems very promising.
Great. Well, as always, Monty, appreciate you and your team, and Stacy and Elizabeth for all the help that you're always putting in with us. So more to come, I guess, for those of you on the call, and we'll let you get back to your day.